Hello, and welcome to what will probably be the first of many videos in a kind of experiment that I will be doing with myself on how uh, well I can tease out ideas and concepts from books that I really enjoy reading. I want to do this because I think that it's very important for me to ensure that I'm engaging with the literature that I'm reading, to explain interesting and fascinating connections that I make within the text and perhaps between texts. Um, and so for this, I want to ensure that I'm giving myself a set of rules so that I don't kind of diverge from the point and the philosophy of what I'm asking myself to do here. I only have three major rules. One, no major cuts. Two, I need a concise thesis for each video. And three, I will not allow myself to heavily script any of these videos. So what you get is what you get. Or what I get is what I get. I think I'm going to make all of these unlisted, or most of these unlisted. Who knows? The first book that I want to talk about is The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. The reason why I want to do this is because this is obviously one of my favorite books. It's the one that I've chosen to have my first video on. And because this is my second time reading it recently, and it contained a lot more in it than I had previously expected. And so, with the background of those three rules, again, no major cuts, I need a concise thesis, and I need to make sure that I'm not scripting these. I can limit myself to maybe some bullet points. I will get started. My thesis statement for this video is that the only characters who are free in The Sirens of Titan are the characters of Boaz and Chrono. One of the things that we see throughout the entirety of the book of Sirens of Titan is this consistent conversation or worry about freedom. One of the things that Ransom, Malachi Constance's father, asks him to do when he writes him the letter is to, and this is where the no cutting comes in. Here we go, page 89. So have a look around for me, boy, and if you go broke and someday somebody comes along with a crazy proposition, my advice is to take it. You might just learn something when you're in a mood to learn something. The only thing I ever learned was that some people are lucky and other people aren't, and not even a graduate of the Harvard Business School can say why. And then in the first paragraph, it says, what I want you to try and find out is there anything special going on, or is it all just as crazy as it looked to me? And crazy is an understatement for this book. We have Winston Niles Rumford, who, with his dog Kazak, flies into a chronosynclastic infundibulum, which stretches him across as a wave from the sun emanating out into the universe. And we have him being able to read minds. We have him predicting the future because he exists in multiple points. He exists as a series of potentialities on Mercury, at times on Earth, Venus, or not Venus, Mars, Titan, the only planet or moon that he is simultaneously on at all times, or consistently on, is the moon of Titan. We have a debaucherous man, Malachi Constant. We have Winston Niles Rumford's wife, Beatrice Rumford, who is totally obsessed with purity and with the idea that she can remain pure above all else, that she can avoid being defiled. And it's all done hyperbolically. It's all done to the point of being a charade, a kind of charade. Like this book is absurd to the nth degree. But again, the whole idea is freedom, because you have this character, Winston Niles Rumford, who is essentially directing the events of the entire book. We see that he predicts the future for Malachi and his wife Beatrice. We see that he sets up the army on Mars. We see that it's all in the effort to kind of unite the Earth, the people of Earth together in this new sense of community after feeling total sense of pity at the sad, poor Martians who just wanted to come to Earth to bring everybody together. Winston Niles Rumford is just kind of pulling the strings in the background, and we know that because it's laid out relatively clearly. And he's not a gracious actor, too. He lies to characters in order for them to kind of be caught off their guard. he tells his wife Beatrice that the whale, the ship, would be taking off with her on it, and she is smugly sitting in her house while it's taking off before she gets abducted by Martians and taken to Mars. Malachi Constant is told that he would be going to Mars on similar premises, and so he gives up all of his holdings in the spaceship company that I don't remember the name of the spaceship company, but he gives up all the shares and just goes on a total bender for like a week and a half for the sake of totally erasing all possibilities that he might even be fit to fly to Mars, let alone to take Beatrice Rumford as his mate and to have a son with her. And so you immediately see that Malachi and Beatrice are totally unfree. They don't have any possibility of acting of their own accord, really. They might try to, but no matter what they try, they're going to end up doing the things that they have been told would happen to them, or do the things that they have been told they would do, whether they like it or not. We also end up finding that Winston Niles Rumford, surprisingly, was also not free to do anything he wanted. He was under the influence of the Tralfalmadorans, someone who, throughout the entire book, we presume is in control over everything, which would mean that presumably he has total control over himself, is also at the whim of an extraterrestrial species who is using his actions in order to deliver a spare part to the machine Salo, who is stuck on Titan after a malfunction of his ship many millennia in the past. And so we're kind of left in an interesting position because Noel Constant tells his son, is there anything out there, essentially? Is there any reason for this, or is it just all pure luck? And in the beginning of the novel, we see that we not only see Noel Constant asking his son through the letter, what I want you to try and find out is there anything special going on, or is it all just as crazy as it looked to me? We also see his financial manager, Ransom K. Fern, asking him, Malachi Constant, and I will now ask you for one small favor. If the letter seems to cast the vaguest light on what life might be about, I would appreciate your telephoning me at home. The irony here is that Ransom desires that the letter has some kind of inkling about what the purpose of this life is. And Noel Constant also is asking his son what the purpose of life is. And so the weight of the question, what is life about? Do we have a control over our own freedom? Do we have control over what goes on in our own lives? Ultimately rests on a very unstable actor, Malachi Constant, who throughout the entire novel is almost uniquely positioned as one of the least controlling characters whatsoever. That does not necessarily negate the agency that he does have in doing some really terrible things, but we see in the grand scheme of things, his life is pretty prescriptive, and he didn't really have much room to break through what was expected of him, or what people knew would happen. So I think this leads me to a relatively interesting position that in asking who is the most free in this book, in a book full of characters who are essentially unfree, we see two characters that stand out, like I said in my thesis, Boaz and Chrono. Now, why do I say that? Both of these characters are, in the grand scheme of things, relatively minor characters. Boaz is the actually free commander of the regiment that Malachi or Unk is in, and we see that Chrono is the son of Malachi Constant and Beatrice Rumford. We see that they are in some ways very important. I mean, Boaz was very important in the sense that he was one of the commanders who was kind of pulling the strings on the back of the Martian army. even though we also see that he didn't know who his commander was. The real commanders didn't know who the real commander was, who essentially ended up being Winston Niles Rumford. The question about Boaz then is that he didn't know. He wasn't really free to make his own decisions on Mars because Winston Niles Rumford was actually running the show. He was just kind of this puppet, real commander, who was puppeting essentially automatons, living automatons, people with antenna in the back of their skull, which would direct everything they did, or which would inflict great pain if they did something that was not to the liking of the commander of the regiment. The real, completely free commander of the regiment, such as Boaz. We don't really see Boaz start to live into his freedom until we see them go to Mercury, especially after the 3 years have elapsed since they landed on Mercury. We see that Malachi is still totally hell-bent on escaping the planet. He has not lived in the spaceship or near Boaz. They will interact on occasion to get supplies. However, Malachi is directly interested in escape from Mercury. That's his single idea. That is his driving force. Whereas we see Boaz start to very quickly kind of acclimate himself to the idea of being a caretaker for the harmoniums. We see he is much more satisfied with the idea of just being a simple kind of shepherd to these very simple organisms who don't really have a lot of capacity for thought, or for complex thought, that is. We know that they are slightly telepathic because we are told that they have the ability to send like automatic responses to each other. Two possible responses. The first being, here I am, here I am, here I am. And the second being, so glad you are, so glad you are, so glad you are. The freedom element is kind of embedded into these harmoniums. They find freedom in the simple existence of existing and acknowledging each other's existence. Again, acknowledging in the very basic sense. They are glad that the other harmoniums are there. So it seems like they have built a kind of proto-community that's essentially just based on plastering the walls of these caves in order to kind of soak up the song of Mercury. There's not really conflict. It doesn't seem like there's too much pain on harmoniums, other than the pain inflicted by maybe too much pleasure. But in a well-balanced community like the harmoniums, without any outside influences, the harmoniums are just there. They are just existing. Here I am, here I am, here I am. So glad you are, so glad you are, so glad you are. And we see Boaz kind of incorporated into that song, into that chant, into that creed. We see that he is Malachi proposes that they escape because Winston Niles Rumford has painted using harmoniums the answer to to solve the puzzle that they have been stuck in. They can't get out with the ship because the sonar that kind of guides them out only is on the bottom of the ship, so it can guide them down through a series of caves, but it can't take them out. Winston Niles Rumford says, hey, just flip the ship upside down so it can do it the other way around. It's absurd as sci-fi. But this is probably one of the most moving parts of the whole book for me, because we see Boaz in this moment like totally understand himself and see what his own situation in life is. He knows that he was abducted at the age of 14 by the Martians. As an orphan, he had no earthly family to speak of, more than likely. That's the only information we get of his earthly life. He's taken to Mars. He is put in command of essentially a series of living automatons. He then is put on a ship with Malachi and sent to Mercury against his will, and he's stuck. But what does he do? He says, you come and tell me the big news. Boaz, you say we're going to be free. And I get all excited and I drop everything I'm doing and I get set to be free. And I keep saying it over to myself about how I'm going to be free, said Boaz. And then I try to think what that's going to be like. And all I can see is people. They push me this way, then they push me that, and nothing pleases them. And they get madder and madder on account of nothing makes them happy. And they holler at me on account of I ain't made them happy. And we all push and pull some more. And then all of a sudden, said Boaz, I remember all the crazy little animals I've been making so happy so easy with music. And I go find thousands of them lying around dead on account of Boaz forgot all about them. He was so excited about being free. And every one of them just lost lives I could have saved if I'd have just kept my mind on what I was doing. And then I say to myself, said Boaz, I've never been nothing good to people, and people never been nothing good to me. So what I want to be free in crowds of people for? And then I knew what I was going to say to you, Unc, when I got back here, said Boaz. I found me a place where I can do good without doing any harm. And I can see I'm doing good, and them I'm doing good for know I'm doing it. And they love me, Unc, as best they can. I found me a home. And when I die down here someday, said Boaz, I'm going to be able to say to myself, Boaz, you made millions of lives worth living. Ain't nobody ever spread more joy. You ain't got an enemy in the universe. Boaz became for himself the affectionate mama and papa he'd never had. You go to sleep now, he said to himself, imagining himself on a stone deathbed in the caves. You're a good boy, Boaz, he said. Good night. And that is the last we hear of Boaz, this long passage about Boaz's inner debate about what freedom means to him. And he ends up choosing seclusion and entrapment on Mercury with literally no way to escape. Physical entrapment, he cannot escape, in place of physical freedom and the interaction and community of humanity. In the end, we know that this was also prescribed. We can assume this was also prescribed for Boaz because Winston Howes Rumford says that only one spaceman will return to Earth, and that will fulfill the prophecy he's been spreading on Earth. So is Boaz really free? Maybe not if we determine freedom as this kind of ability to change the course of events as Winston Howes Rumford sees it. But he is free in the sense that he has accepted where he is at, and he has accepted his role. He has accepted a role that is essentially charitable. It is essentially kind and loving in nature versus selfish and domineering in nature. And so we see in Boaz the shift that requires us to hold ourselves in a true light and say, where am I and where do I want to be? Boaz was free on Mars in the sense that he could control other human beings, essentially truly without their consent. He was a despot. He was a monster on Mars. He didn't know any better. He didn't have a fully developed idea of what it meant to be a leader that hadn't been modeled for him, but yet he still had the agency in order to make those decisions. He could have chosen differently, and yet he chose to be a monster on Mars. Versus he's made the shift in these 3 years. We're not given the reason how or why, but he's made the shift on Mercury to saying, I'm no longer going to be interested in that life. I'm no longer interested in the community of humanity who I've done so much harm to and who has done so much harm to me. They push me this way, then they push me that, and nothing pleases them, and they get madder and madder on account of nothing makes them happy. He's found freedom in his happiness. He's found freedom in his solitude with these harmoniums on Mercury, and he's imagined a world in which he can die happily and die at peace without an enemy in the world, which is very different than what he experienced on Mars, where he had enemies in the sense that he was inflicting pain on others, which would make them his enemies, and which made him their enemies, or their enemy. We can assume on Earth as well. We can assume that he did not have a very fulfilling or kind existence on Earth before he was abducted to Mars. And so he's made the critical decision to stay on Mercury and to adopt the full freedom of that decision. And so that's why I would say that Boaz is one character in the novel that really actually does embody this sense of freedom that kind of breaks apart from what every other character is stuck within. Freedom as the sense of being able to take on your own sense of responsibility for your own self, to live a life of peace, of kindness, and of simplicity. And we see another example of that in Chrono, I would argue. It's a little bit more complicated, but I would argue that Chrono is another example of a character in this novel that is essentially at their core free by the end of the novel. We see that at the beginning of the novel, or at the beginning of our time meeting Chrono, Chrono is essentially unfree. He is stuck playing German bat-ball in a school that is his only thing he's really good at. He is known as the kid who is best at German bat-ball. He's stuck. Other kids fear him. They respect him because of his prowess and ability. But he kind of set apart from other kids in that way. Even the teacher fears him. She kind of gives him space as he's getting ready to swing. She kind of hypes up his ego. They all kind of hype up his ego. So he's built this kind of personality and life for himself in which his being good at German bat-ball is self-perpetuating. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. He's good at German bat-ball. Other kids know that he is, so they don't want to burst his ego, so they kind of play it easy for him or take it easy on him, and so which makes him more of a legend at playing German bat-ball. He has no respect for his father whatsoever. Understandably, his father was not at all present, and he understands that there's some base level nihilism on Mars, where as soon as you turn 14, you're getting an antenna in your head, and you're not going to really be your own person anymore. So he says, why should I care? Why should I care who you are? Why should I care what you have to give to me? This sense of freedom that you're offering me, Malachi, or Unk. You say you're my father. You say that we're going to get out of here to be free. I don't care. You have not given me any compelling reason to go with you to be free. We see when he's on Earth, they crash land in the Amazon, and we don't really get a huge idea of exactly what went down. We know that he and his mother got much closer during that time in order to survive. And then the next time we see them is as the concessionaires outside the Rumford estate, as Rumford is about to materialize. The concessionaires, all veterans of the Martian War, Martians who are veterans of the war, have these stalls, these concession stands that they can sell icons out of, essentially. And Chrono is in a stall with his mother, Beatrice Rumford, B. Rumford, and he has this continuing nihilistic attitude. Sergeant Brackman laid his folded arms on the half partition between his booth and B's. He winked at young Chrono, who was lying on an unopened case of Malachi's. Go to hell, eh, kid? Said Brackman to Chrono. Go to hell, Chrono agreed. He was cleaning his nails with the strangely bent, drilled, and nicked piece of metal that had been his good luck piece on Mars. It was still his good luck piece on Earth. So we see that Chrono is still not adopting this sense of freedom. He doesn't care about anything. He doesn't care about anyone other than his mother. And even then, that relationship is not really seen as a very healthy one. We see that she may enable him or not really take care of him disciplinarily in a way that maybe he really needs as a young person. And we're going to see the result of that very soon. But then by the very end of the novel, we see that Chrono, B, and Malachi end up going to Titan. And they are stuck there. I mean, they take the ship and they just remain on Titan. They see Winston Niles Rumford, and he essentially drops the bombshell that everything that has happened to them, to Earth, since the inception of human culture, human society, has been orchestrated by the Trafalmadorans in order to get this good luck piece, this spare piece, to Salo so that he could put it in his reactor, which runs on the universal will to become, so that Salo can continue his journey to the opposite end of the universe to deliver his message that the Trafalmadorans have bestowed upon him the luxurious and great honor of being the messenger for. And so this kind of blows the top over the whole narrative, because we see that there's no one who's really been free. Everything has been caught up in this web of Trafalmadoran conspiracy. And I've kind of talked about how Boaz was technically part of that as well, because Winston Niles Rumford was prophesying that Malachi would be the only space wanderer to return, which assumes that he knew that Boaz would not return, which means that Boaz kind of had to stay on Mercury. He had to stay on stage right, off the wings, doing his own thing with the harmoniums. But again, freedom isn't necessarily, I would argue, this ability to change the script. The script for this entire novel is set. There's no way to change it. The Tralfamadorans have been doing it for over 200,000 years. So what does freedom look like in the novel? Well, like I said, the freedom of these characters is the ability to adopt for themselves an inner peace that involves some sense of satisfaction and a sense of kindness. So we see that Chrono, at the very end of the novel, ends up throwing in his lot with the Titanic bluebirds, these native species of birds to Titan. They're very large, and he just kind of just roams with them. He is one of them now. We are told that he wore their feathers, sat on their eggs, shared their food, and spoke their language, which means that they have a culture, and he has adopted himself into that culture. Sometimes late at night, Malachi would hear Chrono's cries. Constant did not answer the cries. The cries were for nothing and nobody on Titan. They were for Phoebe, a passing moon. Sometimes when Constant was out gathering Titanic strawberries or the speckled 2-pound eggs of the Titanic plover, he would come across a little shrine made of sticks and stones in a clearing. Chrono made hundreds of these shrines. The marks on the ground made it clear that young Chrono, no longer so young, spent hours moving the elements of the system in these shrines about. When old Malachi Constant found one of his strange son's shrines in a state of neglect, he would tidy it up as best he could. Constant would weed it and rake it, and make a new twig ring for the stone that was Saturn. He would put a fresh bluebird feather under the stone that was Titan. Tidying up the shrines was as close, spiritually, as Constant could get to his son. He respected what his son was trying to do with religion. And sometimes, when Constant gazed at a refurbished shrine, he moved the elements of his own life about experimentally, but he did it in his head. At such times, he was likely to reflect in melancholy on 2 things in particular: his murder of Stoney Stevenson, his best and only friend, and his winning so late in life the love of Beatrice Rumford. Constant never found out whether Chrono knew who tidied up the shrines. Chrono may have thought his god or gods were doing it. It was all so sad, but it was all so beautiful too. B. Rumford lived alone in Rumford's Taj Mahal. Her contacts with Chrono were far more harrowing than Constance. At unpredictable Chrono would swim out to the palace, dress himself from Rumford's wardrobe, announce that it was his mother's birthday, and spend the day in indolent, sullen, reasonably civilized discourse. At the end of the day, Chrono would rage at the clothes and his mother and civilization. He would tear off the clothes, scream like a bluebird, and dive into the Winston Sea. And here's where my previous statement about being able to adopt a sense of peace and kindness for yourself, which is the hallmark of freedom, kind of falls apart, because we don't see that Chrono is essentially living a kind life on Titan. We know that he's thrown in his lot with the Titanic bluebirds, and we know that he has some kind of organized religion or some sense of semblance of spirituality, which requires the creation of these shrines, hundreds of these shrines around Titan, in a kind of iconographic way, I suppose. But he terrorizes his mother. He will just, at times, on whims that no one can control, come to her, be kind of sullen, sad, and at the end of the time when he's discussing things with her, talking with her in a reasonably civilized way, he'll just scream and rage at everything and then throw it all off and dive off into the Winston Sea. So if freedom isn't about inner peace and kindness, or if that's just one part of it, what is this part that Chrono exemplifies? And I think what Chrono exemplifies is the freedom of escape, the freedom of being able to, after all this is said and done, after the bombshell has been dropped, after the spare piece has been given away to Sallow. Well, Sallow is dead, but anyway. When the spare piece has been properly delivered, as the Tralfamadorans wanted, in exact specifications, he just goes away. He doesn't try to make sense of what's happened. He doesn't try to keep going down this path that has failed him for so long. He just ejects himself from human society, except for on occasions going to his mother, and lives contentedly with the bluebirds. His is a tragic ending, I would argue. I think that Chrono is the son. Well, sorry, Chrono is the son of rape. He's the son of abuse. He is the son of forcing one's will upon another. Malachi Constant raping B. Rumford on the ship to Mars that he took. And there really is nothing or very little that is redeeming to Chrono about the human race. There's very little that has been done for him by the human race that is maybe good, just, kind, or worthy of any kind of admiration. So it's very understandable that Chrono would be totally willing and actually eager to quit all that, to go away and to live with the bluebirds. But I still think that's a kind of freedom. That is a freedom that allows you to make your own place, to be radically imaginative about the possibilities that your life has at any given moment. No one told Chrono to go off with the bluebirds. He made that decision for himself. He saw a species that lived simply, that had a culture that was essentially untouched by human influence, and he wanted to join them. He chose the freedom of disconnection over essentially being strangled, even by the small connection with his biological father and mother. So whereas I would argue that Boaz's freedom is a joyful ending for Boaz. It really is a touching ending, even though it's still marred by the sense of pain that Boaz had experienced from other humans, and from really trying to figure out exactly what his role is or was in the pain he inflicted on others. Chrono is totally uninterested in that endeavor. He is totally uninterested in understanding or coming to a deeper knowledge about the role that he has played in everything that has happened, and he just quits it. He takes that step. Okay, so Boaz and Chrono are the only two free characters. I will have a little addendum here, I will say. I would also argue that it's possible to say that Malachi in the end becomes free through at the very end of the novel, the epilogue. And again, probably another one of the most moving parts of the whole novel. One of the reasons why this is one of my favorite novels to begin with. Excuse me. Let me just read it. So the whole idea here is that Salo has been reconstructed by Malachi, has conveniently chosen to reanimate after Beatrice dies, and we see Salo take Malachi in his flying saucer back to Earth, and Constant wants to go to Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, Earth, Solar System, Milky Way. And Salo tries to disincentivize it. He tries to dissuade Malachi from doing that. But he cannot, he's unsuccessful, and so he ends up dropping Malachi off at a bus stop in Indianapolis in the middle of winter. This is the last page and a half of the book. More snow fell. The bus Malachi Constant was waiting for ran 2 hours late that morning on account of the snow. When the bus did come, it was too late. Malachi Constant was dead. Salo had hypnotized him so that he would imagine, as he died, that he saw his best and only friend, Stony Stevenson. As the snow drifted over Constant, he imagined that the clouds opened up, letting through a sunbeam all for him. A golden spaceship, encrusted with diamonds, came skimming down the sunbeam, landed in the untouched snow of the street. Out stepped a stocky, red-headed man with a big cigar. He was young. He wore the uniform of the Martian Assault Infantry, Unk's old outfit. "Hello, Unk," he said. "Get in." "Get in," said Constant. "Who are you?" "Stony Stevenson, Unk. You don't recognize me?" "Stony?" said Constant. "That's you, Stony?" "Who else could stand the bloody place?" said Stony. He laughed. "Get in," he said. "And go where?" said Constant. "Paradise," said Stony. "What's paradise like?" said Constant. "Everybody's happy there forever," said Stony. or as long as the bloody universe holds together. Get in, Unc. Beatrice is already there, waiting for you. Beatrice? Said Unc, getting into the spaceship. Stoney closed the airlocks, pressed the on button. We're going to paradise now? Said Constant. I'm going to get into paradise? Don't ask me why, old sport, said Stoney, but somebody up there likes you. And so it was a result of hypnosis. This didn't actually happen. It was a kind of hallucination that Unc has. But really, we see that in the end, Malachi does also achieve some kind of freedom in the sense that he has the peace to kind of break the script. We assume that Winston Niles Rumford knew that... Actually, no, he didn't, because Winston Niles Rumford would have been ejected out of the solar system before Malachi died. So, in a sense, everything that happens after Winston Niles Rumford is ejected from the solar system is an indication of the characters being able to act in some kind of freedom. But the problem is that Malachi still is Malachi. He still has this sense of shame hanging about him. We're told that he and Beatrice only fall in love with each other really in the last year of their time together, and there's some kind of problematic things that are said between them that makes me think that Beatrice is kind of accepting her role as the victim and trying to make some sense out of it in a way that gives Malachi way too much credit. I won't get into that. But Malachi still can't get over the fact that he did some really terrible things. He murdered his best friend. He only just fell in love with Bee. I mean, in the section that I read previously, we saw that those were the two things that Malachi was preoccupied by. And I'll read it again. And sometimes, when Constant gazed at a refurbished shrine, he moved the elements of his own life around experimentally, but he did it in his head. At such times, he was likely to reflect in melancholy on two things in particular: his murder of Stoney Stevenson, his best and only friend, and his winning, so late in life, the love of Beatrice Rumford. That's the end. I'll add in parentheses, the woman who he had raped. And so he was essentially unable to get over this. He was on Titan for a long time. I think around 30 years is the time frame. I could look it up, but I think it's around 30 years that he, Beatrice, and Chrono are just kind of on Titan, doing their own thing. And he finds satisfaction in his work. We find that he becomes good with his hands. He ends up becoming some kind of a forager, a handyman for Beatrice on the rare occasions where she wants him to come over. And at the end, Sallow provides Malachi with the freedom, even if hallucinated, of thinking that it was all okay, that the mistakes that he made, the terrible things that he did, were kind of washed over. They were expunged from the record, that Stoney didn't die, or that even if Stoney did die, he would be able to accompany Stoney to paradise and be with his best friend. And they would also be with Beatrice, the woman who he really desperately wanted to have some kind of connection with, the woman who he was essentially prevented from having a connection with on account of her hatred of him before even going to Mars. And then after that, his rape of her. And after that, the fact that both of their memories were essentially wiped, that they had no recollection of each other whatsoever. And so we see Malachi's life kind of ties itself up into a neat little bow that Sallow has provided Unc, also known as Malachi Constant, a hallucination, a convenient hallucination, a charitable hallucination, in order to make his passing, his last moments on Earth, meaningful in any way. Is it real freedom? I would argue no, because it was contrived. It was false freedom. In addition, it is not true that Malachi had this moment of redemption. In the end, the redemption was false. His record was not expunged. There is no paradise. There is no covering over of his sins. And yet, it's still a very compelling ending to the book. the whole book, we're told that nothing matters. It's essentially a book where nothing matters. None of the actions that any of the characters had, in the end, really changed anything. The Trefalmadorans occupy this kind of role as God, and humanity cannot do anything to escape that. But it is a Tralfalmadoran who ends up providing Malachi Constant, a terrible person, a Trefalmadoran Salo, who ends up providing Malachi Constant with a kind of mercy, an undeserved mercy, of believing in his last moments that what he had done in his life has led up to some kind of ultimate redemptive moment where these things didn't matter, where the actions that he took to unwillingly kill Stoney Stevenson, it wasn't his fault that he did it, but he still did it, or willingly rape and abuse Beatrice Rumford, even though he didn't know it was her. His whole life was riding this kind of razor between, well, can he really be blamed, or was it really just circumstance? It didn't matter. Those things still happened. They were still weighing on his conscience. And the fact that he did it is enough to say he's not a very good person. In addition to the things that he had done earlier in life, being debaucherous, being totally materialistic, uncaring towards others' needs, kind of personal demagogue to people, unable to really control his emotions and actions, his repressed feelings of shame and frustration at the fact that he didn't have a close connection with his father. He, out of all the characters in the entire novel, other than potentially Boaz, has a happy ending where he's given a vision and can die with the sense that maybe it was all worth something, that maybe it would all be worth it in the end, and that it has been worth it in the end. So that's my video. This went on a lot longer than I thought it would. 43 minutes almost. There's also a lot more to say about this novel. I didn't even touch on the thing that Beatrice Rumford said. The worst thing that can happen in life is to not be used by anyone. Thank you for using me, Malachi, even when I didn't want to be used. That's crazy. That's insane. But I won't talk about that. Maybe I'll do another video. Who knows? I'm just yapping at this point. But yeah, that's my first video, and I really enjoyed this book. If for whatever reason you're watching this and it's not me, definitely read this. Maybe I spoiled everything, but yeah. Anyway, peace out.